All cameras point upward as a silvery silhouette cuts through the low morning clouds. It's the Comac C919, the Chinese commercial jet that promised to revolutionize global aviation and break the Boeing-Airbus duopoly. But something is terribly wrong. The first hours after takeoff were crucial in demonstrating to the world that China had finally achieved the impossible. Hundreds of engineers in the control center monitored every flight parameter, every vibration, every pressure in the hydraulic systems. The world was watching. Sign up now and activate the bell so you don't miss any details of this explosive investigation. Leave a comment. Would you trust your life to a Chinese plane? The answer may surprise you. The blue sky over the East China Sea witnessed something Chinese officials never imagined publicizing. Approximately 43 minutes after takeoff from Pudong International Airport, sensors began detecting thermal anomalies in the left CFM LEAP-1C engine. The temperature rose 17 degrees above normal in less than 90 seconds. Inside the cockpit, Captain Liu Wei, a veteran with over 15,000 flight hours, felt the aircraft shake. It wasn't the usual turbulence every pilot knows. It was something different, visceral, as if the very skeleton of the plane was protesting against forces it wasn't meant to withstand. The warning systems began to flash simultaneously. First the ECAS, then the fly-by-wire flight control system, followed by the hydraulic pressure gauges. A cascade of failures transformed the cabin into a nightmare of red lights and shrill alarms that pierced the crew's eardrums. Chinese state media had promised the world that the C919 was the definitive answer to Western dominance in commercial aviation. For years, billions of yuan were invested in the project. Entire factories sprang up out of nowhere in remote provinces. Thousands of engineers were recruited from top universities, many of them trained in the United States and Europe, now working to dethrone their former masters. The project began in 2008, when the Commercial Aviation Corporation of China decided it was time to compete on equal terms with the Western giants. The name C919 carried deep meanings. C for China, 9 for eternity in Chinese culture, and 19 representing the 190 seats in the standard configuration. But on that fateful March morning, all the promises, all the fiery speeches from Communist Party bureaucrats about Chinese technological supremacy were being put to the most brutal test possible. At 7,000 meters above sea level, traveling at 320 kilometers per hour, the left engine began to disintegrate. Fragments of superheated metal tore from the turbine blades like machine gun shells. One piece the size of a human fist pierced the engine cowling, another ricocheted off the fuselage, leaving a 50-centimeter black mark. The third fragment severed critical hydraulic lines. Co-pilot Zhang Hua, with only 2,000 hours of experience, froze for 3 precious seconds. His fingers trembled on the controls as his brain struggled to process the impossible. This was the pride of the nation, tested thousands of times in simulators, approved by hundreds of inspections. How could it be failing?
Mayday, mayday, mayday. Comac 972 Victor with catastrophic engine failure, requesting immediate return to Pudong.
Shanghai's control tower exploded into frenetic activity. 12 air traffic controllers worked simultaneously to clear the airspace. 3 Airbus A320s were diverted. A Boeing 777 entered a holding pattern, and a domestic flight was instructed to gain altitude quickly. But the C919 was bleeding. Not blood, but something equally vital. Green hydraulic fluid oozed from the ruptured lines like sap from a wounded tree. Every drop that escaped meant less control, less maneuverability, less chance of landing the 70-ton monster safely. The fly-by-wire system, that marvel of modern engineering that translates pilot commands into electrical impulses that move control surfaces, began to degrade. The central computer attempted to compensate for the loss of hydraulic pressure by redistributing the load to redundant systems. But redundancy has limits, and those limits were quickly being reached. Inside the empty passenger cabin, Thank goodness this was just a certification flight with no civilians on board. 16 test engineers watched their screens with growing horror. They saw the raw data, the numbers that didn't lie. The engine temperature had reached 820 degrees Celsius, 200 degrees above the safe limit. Chen Xiaolong, a chief propulsion engineer with 30 years of experience, immediately realized what was happening. The turbine blades, made of a titanium alloy developed specifically for the C919, were failing due to material fatigue. These weren't the blades imported from CFM International, but rather improved components substituted by COMAC to reduce foreign dependence. The irony was bitter as bile. In the name of technological independence, in the name of national pride, they had replaced components tested for decades with Chinese versions that appeared identical in the specifications on paper. But paper doesn't fly at an altitude of 10,000 meters, withstanding G-forces that would make an Olympic athlete faint. The engine finally died completely, 7 minutes after the first anomalies. It wasn't a silent death. It was a final roar, a final spasm of mechanical protest before becoming dead weight hanging under the left wing. The C919 banked violently 15 degrees to the left. Liu Wei fought the controls like a man taming a raging bull. His years of training, his survival instincts, all converged in that moment. He pushed back on the right stick, applied rudder trim, and increased the right engine's thrust to 60%. Not too much, or he risked disintegrating the second engine as well. The aircraft responded, slowly, reluctantly, like a giant ship turning in rough waters. The artificial horizon in front of the pilots showed the world returning to balance. 15 degrees became 10, then 7, then 3. For a moment, it seemed the worst was over. But engineering is unforgiving to the arrogant. The loss of hydraulic fluid continued, now at a rate of 2 liters per minute. Secondary systems took over, then tertiary ones. When the fourth backup system began showing signs of failure, even the most optimistic of engineers knew they were in uncharted territory. The protocol for total engine failure in modern aircraft is well established. Hundreds of pilots have made safe landings with only one engine functioning. But the C919 wasn't just any aircraft. It was a new design, with unique flight characteristics and systems that were still being fully understood. The altitude began to drop. 7,000 meters became 6,800. Liu Wei had no choice. He needed to descend to increase the air density and gain more lift. But descending too quickly risked exceeding the maximum speed the damaged structure could withstand. Zhang Hua, the co-pilot, finally regained his composure. He began reading the emergency checklist aloud, his voice gaining steadiness with each item.
Auxiliary hydraulic pump, on emergency electrical system, operational, fuel trim, set.
In the ground control center, 60 pairs of eyes watched the tragedy unfold in real time. Telemetry displayed every critical parameter: speed, altitude, pressure, temperature, G-force. The numbers danced across the screens like a death sentence written in red digits. A junior engineer began to cry silently at his workstation. He had spent 3 years designing the engine's cooling system, 3 years of his life dedicated to something that was now failing spectacularly. His supervisor placed a firm hand on his shoulder but said nothing. What words could possibly comfort him in that moment? The C919 was now at 5,000 meters, descending at a rate of 400 meters per minute. The Pudong runway was 130 kilometers away. Quick calculations revealed the brutal truth. They would reach the airport at less than 1,000 meters of altitude. Would that be enough? No one knew, because no one had tested that specific scenario. The C919's wings, engineered with supercritical technology to maximize fuel efficiency, were now working beyond their design limits. Structural stress was growing by the second. Strain gauge sensors embedded in the structure were sending alarming data. The left wing was flexing 3 degrees beyond safety specifications. Liu Wei felt the vibration through the control stick. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Aerodynamic flutter, every aerospace engineer's nightmare. If the oscillations increased, if they resonated with the structure's natural frequency, the wing could literally tear itself apart in midair. He reduced speed even further, sacrificing safety margin for structural stability. They were now flying at just 20 knots above stall speed, that critical point where the air stops flowing smoothly over the wings and the aircraft becomes a 70-ton boulder falling from the sky. The coast appeared on the horizon. The dark blue waters of the East China Sea gave way to the muddy waters of the Yangtze River estuary. Pudong was close, yet still agonizingly distant. Every second felt like an eternity, every minute a century of concentrated tension. The fuel gauges showed another complication. The automatic balancing system had failed, along with the hydraulics. The left tank held 2 tons more than the right, creating an imbalance that Liu Wei had to constantly compensate for with the controls. His arms were beginning to tingle from the constant strain.
Comac Niner 72 Victor, you are on course for final intercept. Wind 330 at 15 knots. Runway 34 left is clear and ready.
But then, at 10,000 feet, the unthinkable happened. The right engine, that single precious engine keeping 83 people alive, began to cough. It wasn't the catastrophic disintegration of the left engine, but something equally terrifying. Combustion instability, flames flickering irregularly in the combustion chamber. Chen Xiaolong saw the data first. The engine's exhaust temperature fluctuated wildly. 700 degrees, then 600, then 750. The engine was struggling, choking, desperately trying to maintain power while something inside it slowly died.
Possible debris ingestion from the left engine,
Chen shouted over the intercom. His hypothesis made terrible sense. Fragments from the destroyed engine had been sucked into the working engine, damaging compressor blades and creating turbulence in the airflow. Liu Wei didn't hesitate. He pushed the right engine throttle to 85%, well beyond the recommended throttle, but necessary to maintain enough altitude to reach the runway. The engine responded reluctantly, like an exhausted horse being whipped into one last effort. The airport was now visible. Runway 3 or 4 on the left stretched like a gray ribbon across the Shanghai cityscape. Ambulances and fire trucks were already in position, white foam being prepared, rescue teams on high alert. At 2,000 meters, the landing gear system was activated. Exhausted hydraulics struggled to lower all 3 landing gear units. The nose unit descended and locked. The right unit descended and locked. But the left unit, of course it would be the left, jammed mid-travel. Zhang Hua activated the emergency extension system. A burst of pressurized nitrogen was supposed to force the wheels down, using sheer brute force. The C919 shook violently as the system triggered. For 3 eternity-defying seconds, nothing happened. Then, with a thud audible even in the passenger cabin, the left landing gear dropped into place and locked. At an altitude of 1,000 meters, Liu Wei set the flaps for landing, 30 degrees of deflection. The control surfaces responded slowly, very slowly, as if moving through molasses. The final approach was unstable, oscillating 3 degrees to either side of the center line.
Terrain! Terrain! Pull up!
Liu Wei turned off the alarm with a sudden movement. He knew exactly where the ground was. He didn't need a computer screaming in his ear at this critical moment. 200 meters. The runway approach lights twinkled below like red and white jewels embedded in the asphalt. The right engine was coughing constantly now, each hesitation making everyone's heart skip a beat. 100 meters. Liu Wei completely cut the engine. Better to glide for the last few seconds than risk a catastrophic engine failure meters above the ground. The C919 became a giant glider, 70 tons of metal and technology relying only on the basic physics of aerodynamic lift. 50 meters. He pulled the nose up 5 degrees, bleeding speed, looking for that sweet spot where the rear wheels would touch down first, absorbing the impact before the nose dropped. 20 meters. 10 meters. The world slowed to slow motion. Every detail became crystal clear. The tire tracks from previous landings on the runway, a bird taking off in fright, the reflection of the sun on the control tower. The rear wheels touched the concrete with a rubbery squeal that was the most beautiful thing Liu Wei had ever heard. The nose dipped. The front wheels made contact. He slammed on the brakes, feeling the resistance, the drag, the wonderful sensation of deceleration. The C919 rolled down the runway, losing speed, finally coming to a stop 2,000 meters from touchdown. The engines fell silent. For a moment, no one moved. 83 souls were processing the impossible fact that they were still alive. Then the cabin exploded with activity. Emergency evacuation protocols were initiated. The doors opened, inflatable slides unfolded. Within 90 seconds, the entire crew was outside, on solid ground, staring at the aircraft that had nearly become their tomb. Chen Xiaolong was the last to leave. He stood at the base of the slide, staring at the C919. The left engine was a twisted, blackened husk. The fuselage was marred with scratches and stains of hydraulic fluid. But it had landed. It had survived. In the following days, the Chinese government would attempt to suppress the story. Official reports would mention only minor technical anomalies during certification testing. But the truth has a way of escaping, especially in the age of cell phones and social media. Shaky videos filmed by airport staff showed the dramatic landing. High-resolution photographs revealed the extent of the damage. Western engineers analyzed the footage, pointing out design flaws that any aerospace engineering student would recognize. The official investigation would take months. Computers would reconstruct every microsecond of the flight. Metallurgists would examine every fragment recovered from the destroyed engine. Material fatigue experts would study the fractures with electron microscopes. The conclusion would be inevitable and embarrassing. The C919 had been rushed into flight before it was truly ready. Crucial tests were cut short. Simulations were deemed sufficient when physical tests were needed, and political pressure overrode engineering prudence. The Chinese turbine blades, those meant to demonstrate technological independence, had been manufactured from a titanium alloy that did not meet specifications. Metallurgical analysis revealed microscopic inclusions, imperfections in the crystal structure, and inadequate heat treatment. But perhaps the most bitter lesson was this: aviation has no regard for political propaganda or national ambitions. The laws of physics bow to no one. They don't care about flags or ideologies. A poorly designed plane will crash, no matter how many billions of dollars are invested in it. Today, the C919 flies again, but under much stricter scrutiny. Design changes have been implemented, testing protocols strengthened, and critical parts are once again imported rather than manufactured locally. Pride has given way to pragmatism. Liu Wei received China's highest civilian honor for his heroism, but in private interviews, he admits that the experience has changed him permanently. He sees aviation differently now, understanding viscerally that every redundant system, every safety margin, every tedious protocol exists because someone, somewhere, paid for their knowledge in blood. The Chinese dream of defeating Boeing and Airbus didn't die that March morning. Instead, it matured, becoming more realistic, tempered by the brutal reality of how difficult it actually is to build world-class commercial aircraft.